founded also the 3 rules that we came up with, rules to live by. And I'm just going to tell you what they are because they come in really handy because things happen so fast. It's good to have a few catchwords to fall back on, and you don't have enough time to think. And the first is, 1, don't be afraid of anyone. Now, can you imagine living your life afraid of no one? 2, get a really good bullshit detector and learn how to use it. And 3 is be really, really tender. And with those 3 things, you don't need anything else.
Let's talk about rules, Ty. I personally am a huge fan of rules, love rules.
I hate rules.
There's a specific... Well, let me be clear. There's a specific type of rule that I love and follow. And those are the rules that I've set for myself. I love the rules that I decide I'm going to follow. And my wife and other people in my life would agree begrudgingly to my adherence to my rules and not really any others. But this is going to be a really fun conversation. I think that this quote by Laurie Anderson discussing something that her and Lou Reed decided on. Yeah. And agree. It's beautiful. And so this is going to be our jumping off quote for the day and kind of going to drive our conversation. But rules, your thoughts. You're not a fan, it sounds.
I mean, I've broken a lot of rules. I would say most of them weren't because I wanted to. Just happened to be the way that I guess my personality formed after trauma as a child, became rule breaking and disobedient and nobody's ever going to tell me what to do type of attitude. But I think that also formed in me some things for when I became an artist to realize I need to set my own rules. And I think that's kind of what you're saying as well is, obviously there are rules we need to follow. There are laws, there are things we need to adhere to in life. But as far as people saying, do this, don't do that, do this, you should do this. Rule wise, as an artist, I tend to say, you're not telling me what I can do or can't do. I'm going to pave my own road and do it my way. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think, when rules can have a very, for us, apparently a very negative connotation, but, we could also, I think, agree that that rule is synonymous with, a principle, a guideline, a mantra, a sort of true north of sorts. And that has tremendous value. I'm going to throw my first supporting quote into the mix here and we'll just get into it. But this is a quote, an individual named Jim Rohn, who was a self-development sort of business author and speaker back in the day. But Jim said, if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you'll fall into someone else's plan. And guess what they have planned for you? Not much.
Yeah.
Now, for context, he spoke and kind of addressed a lot of people who are self-employed, kind of charting their own course, business owners, whatever it might be. But that's the artist, right? I mean, we are our own entity, our own, self-driven, self-employed, space. So I think that what I like about that quote in kind of support of our conversation today is that it's really important to, again, if we don't have those, a plan, rules, principles for ourselves, then they will be decided for us and they will be, or at least attempted to be imposed upon us. And without charting our own course, we're going to be subject to having to follow, somebody else's. So I think there's tremendous value in having that compass, right? That tells us what our true north is, because it reminds us of what we believe to be true for ourselves. And it frees us, I think, from really getting stuck in the moment. One of the things that she shared on the front end of that quote, she said, it's good to have a few catchwords to fall back on. It's good to have a few catchwords to fall back on, which is just kind of, again, I think reinforcing that idea of, if we're falling back on something, it implies that we are falling or are going to trip and stumble, which of course we are. We do. Yeah. I don't know about you. I do every day. So having something just to kind of refer back to is like, hey, these are our 3 rules. I think is tremendously valuable. So let's kind of unpack each of these 3 rules. I'm sure we're going to throw in some other fun things, along the way. But rule number 1.
Don't be afraid of anyone. Now, can you imagine living your life afraid of no one?
My first thought was, nope, I sure can't. I sure can't. I mean, I can imagine it, but it takes something. You know what I mean? What was your first reaction when you heard that? Like, let me just ask you directly, Ty, can you imagine your life afraid of no one?
Yes. I think, I read this quote in an interview. Gosh, it might have been 10 years ago. And there was an interview. I can't remember what magazine it was in. Might have been the New York Times in the art section. And it was successful artists giving advice to younger artists was kind of the quip of the article. And this Laurie Anderson quote was in there. And this is what she gave as advice to younger artists. And then I've since heard and seen this multiple places where she talks. And I think when I first heard, don't be afraid of anyone. Now, can you imagine living your life afraid of no one? I thought, I think I'm there. I think I had things in my life that caused so much fear at one point that when I overcame that fear and I overcame those things, I went, why would I be afraid of anybody anymore? Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like I got to this point where it's like, I don't fear a person anymore in my life or people. Now I know we're not all that way, right? We can't be. There's definite things in any of our lives that have put fear of a person or people in our lives at some point along the line. And I think I got to that point where I fear other things a whole lot greater than fearing a person. Because to me, I mean, nobody's going to damage me more than I've been damaged in my lifetime by people. So the fear of them anymore is like insignificant. But there are definitely other things that I really do struggle with fear in.
Well, let's unpack that a little bit because there's...
Sure.
Go ahead, sorry.
No. You.
I want to unpack this a little bit because my first reaction to fear, I mean, the rule itself says afraid of anyone, right? So no one. Yep. So in the context of a person. So I kind of wanted to break that down and say, all right, so what would one be afraid of, right? There's kind of fear of who. Sure. And then I think the next layer below that is the fear of what. And so talking about the fear of who first, I go to, all right, well, there's those who programmed us, those who influenced our programming, growing up. So that's kind of more past. And then there's those who we allow to influence us today, which is, of course, present and future tense. So I was thinking about the first thing that came to mind for me was probably my most recommended book. I just love this book, Awareness by Anthony DeMello. And I could talk about it for an hour. I won't for the moment, but there's a quote from here that I'm going to read here. So he said, "Who's living in you?" It's pretty horrifying when you come to know that. You think you're free, but there probably isn't a gesture, a thought, an emotion, an attitude, a belief in you that isn't coming from someone else. Isn't that horrible? And you know it. Talk about a mechanical life that was stamped into you. You feel pretty strongly about certain things, and you think it is you who are feeling strongly about them, but are you really? It's going to take a lot of awareness for you to understand that perhaps this thing you call I is simply a conglomeration of your past experiences, of your conditioning and programming.
Yes.
So when I think about fear, right? Here, go, please respond to that.
I mean, I get it. I absolutely get it. I have plenty of friends who have this deep, resounding fear of the way they were programmed or the way they were brought up, who still fear their fathers or still fear their mothers or fear a teacher or a coach or a family member that treated them horribly, or not just treated them, were forcing them into a direction they didn't want to go in life. Yeah. Right? I've lived all over the world. I've been in countries, and I've had friends in communist countries and other countries around the world where they are literally forced by family to go one road and one road only. And there's no thought outside of that. And that fear of stepping outside of that line is so great and so heavy that it's absolutely destructive. I would say I've been very, very fortunate that as a goal of wanting to be an artist my entire life, I've never had anybody tell me, you shouldn't do that, don't do that, do something else. I've always been encouraged. I've always been pushed and had a foundation of family and friends that said, go for it. You need to go for it. This is something you love, something that's in you. That's very rare because I have plenty of friends, plenty, who may be female, and the father figure in the family was like, you are a failure if you pursue art. If you do not pursue the family this or this direction, you are a failure to me. Right. And I've seen it. I've witnessed them be embarrassed by their fathers at dinners or in family things because of where they want to be. You know, we've talked about Louise Bourgeois, you know, growing up with her father and the way that her father would just completely embarrass her at a table. And that fear she had of him was so great. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I understand it. And, oh, man, I pray for those that struggle with that. If inauthentic self, because somebody else has put such fear into them somewhere along the road.
Right. And that's the sort of like looking back at the people who have, with or without our permission, influenced our response and our whole outlook on life. I mean, fear is a future based, you know, idea. We are afraid of something that could happen, you know, in the future. And so that's kind of where I go to like the next level or the next whatever step is like fear of what exactly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If I'm afraid of you, for example, because you're, you know, bullying me in the lunchroom, I'm not so much afraid of you, the person. I'm afraid of what you could do to me, right? That you're gonna, whatever, you know, punch me or humiliate me in front of our middle school classmates and take my lunch. I still got some beef with you about that, but we'll deal with that later. But it goes to like what are the types of fears. So I did a little digging as we were kind of preparing here. So there's like, this is I've no way to cite my sources. I don't know even know where this came from, but one of the things I was just looking up for like what are the types of fears. So one of the things I found was there are 7 types of fears in psychology: fear of death, isolation, fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of mispronouncing inadequacy on a podcast, fear of loss of control. Those are 7: death, isolation, unknown, failure, rejection, inadequacy, and loss of control. And I think that probably three or four of these, you know, really apply to our path as artists and kind of how I interpret this first rule from, you know, Laurie and Lou, which is failure, rejection, inadequacy. I mean, those are the 3 that really jump off the page from this, you know, particular list or model, right? Yeah. And I think about like, I'm not afraid. I'm with you on, there's no one that I fear, but there are things that other people could certainly say or do that would make me experience the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of inadequacy, right? So I go to kind of a silly example of, I mean, I think about the way that I process like just crappy comments on social media, you know what I mean?
I was going to talk about that
talking to you about this, like, oh, perfect. So, you know, going back a couple, even, 2-3 years ago, like, I mean, a crappy comment when I first really started, you know, sharing my work. And obviously this doesn't really happen much until something pops at whatever goes viral-ish or whatever gets put in front of people that aren't already following you, is typically when you start to see these types of comments. And there was a time for sure when that would maybe not ruin my day, but like it would take me a minute to like kind of, it would mess with me for sure. You know, and I know that you've walked through that with other artists as well, but talk about that a little bit, you know, so which of those 7 fears kind of, I guess, jump off the page for you, and what's been your experience in navigating that or helping people navigate them in their path as artists?
Yeah, I definitely want to jump on that Instagram train because, you know, when you think of don't be afraid of anyone, now can you imagine living your life afraid of no one? I think that someone, social media has become a someone. Like, so you have all these people that are kind of condensed into one thing, right? It's not like you have 10 people standing in front of you in person and they're all pointing their finger at you. It's hundreds of people, thousands of people, tens of thousands of people with one really big finger sometimes pointing at you. And I'm saying that in a way that it's become that mentally. to people, where the one comment feels like it's 10,000 comments and affects you in such a way that it removes you from the studio, removes you from your goals or your even personal mantras, removes you from that flow of really creating in freedom, and has now put this ultimate stress that 5,000 eyes are watching me because of that one comment. And so that fear now is like really affecting everything that somebody's doing in the studio. And I remember a time a few years ago, I got a text from you. Here we go. Vulnerability time. You ready? I got a text from you and you said, "Hey, Ty, have you seen Jerry Saltz's post today?" And I went, "No, I haven't." And you said, "Check it out." And so I went to Jerry Saltz's post, and he had a carousel up of, I think, 8 or 9 artists making art. And I watched the first one. I swiped to the second one, third one. I think it was maybe fourth or fifth. And there's Nathan Terborg painting in his first year of really painting and making art. And then his whole post is going on to bash male abstract painters who are working large scale, and didn't name any names, didn't say anybody. And he did the typical Jerry thing, which as an art critic, I don't know who these people are. I just found them, and take what you want from it, but here you go. And I went, oh no, oh gosh. So you and I hopped on the phone, right? And we sat there and we discussed like, how do you respond to something like that, right? This isn't just the random Instagram person who likes your art. This is Jerry Saltz, the biggest male art critic in the US. I would say he's not the biggest art critic or the best, because his wife, Roberta, is absolutely insane. But a guy who can make and break a career, a person who could absolutely punch you in the face digitally and knock you out for good and not want to go back to the studio. Like, talk about that.
All right. So this is just a little behind the scenes for everybody. Like Ty and I are still trying to figure things out as far as how we record these. Sometimes we pert near. We almost script them out, and we're like, hey, then we'll talk about this and that. Yeah. And then other times, like today, we're just like, we got a plan. All right. Like, we know what we're going to talk about today, but this was not on the outline.
I mean, it falls under rule 1, right?
No, it absolutely does. Yeah. So when I saw that, and what's funny is, like, it's not as though someone was like, hey, did you see this? To where I had I was just scrolling through Instagram, and you're exactly right. That was like really early on. I was still painting, at that time. And I will say it this way, because of my, background in videography, like my reels game was well ahead of my art game. You know what I mean? So like, there was, and that was one video in particular that got like a crazy amount, of views. And I look back at it now, it's like, yeah, that's an interesting video. The work itself, like, it was a fair, it was fair to lump me into that category. So I'll share 2 things. One was I had a visceral response, in that moment of like a gut wrenching, like, oh, to your point, like, one of the most influential critics has deemed me to be unworthy of this thing that I'm trying to do. And at that time, I definitely suffered from severe imposter syndrome of like, I even had a hard time like being comfortable calling myself an artist. So, I mean, it was real. I was like, oh, this is it. Yep. Could have been a good run as an artist. I think that, so this actually is good to kind of tie things. What allowed me to take that experience and use it as fuel to push me forward rather than pull me down. And again, to your point, like, it's not like there was like Nathan Terborg and here's a critique. It was just a video that fit in the narrative of the post that he was making that day. Right. So it's not like he may not have even, been aware of me, likely. But, I think that because I had, even at that time, a very clear picture of who I am, what I'm about, and how I respond to situations like that, I was able to, with some time, conversation with you, some journaling, some prayer, some meditation, like just kind of getting centered, decide like, all right, this is useful. You know what I mean? Like this type of fuel is very, very powerful. And so I actually made a decision. I wasn't planning on talking about this today, but I made a decision in that moment. I was like, all right, come heck or high water, never again am I going to make work that will easily fall in the category of just another blank.
Yep.
Like, I mean, that was really, I'll meet Jerry someday and I'll thank him for that. Because,
we'll have him on the podcast.
Totally. But it genuinely did have a very positive impact on me overall, because I made a decision in that moment. I'm never again going to be able to, no one's ever going to be able to lump me into a category of just another blank. And really that's what set me off on my, like, how can I do this differently? You know?
Yeah. Well, and Jerry also says, if somebody doesn't like your art, make them hate it. It may be the very thing that is setting you apart. And don't make your art go down that easy. And so in turn, you actually turn around and did exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
You know, so anyways, but it's a great.
I remember when he this is again, like 3 years later.
Yeah.
He started following me and you asked me something along the lines of like, are you going to DM him and, you know, mention that, that story. But I have not to date. But yeah, I mean, so that's a real one, right? But it doesn't take a Jerry Saltz. It didn't at that time to stop me in my tracks and be like, oh my gosh, you know, it could be, you know, whatever, Bobby 5678, you know, no picture, private account, 50 followers, you know, who says something crappy because of whatever reason, you know what I mean? And so that's kind of getting back to that, like whether it's failure, rejection, inadequacy, those all kind of get lumped together, right? It's like, you know, I think it's really easy to fall in the trap of taking the voice of one and magnifying that out to be who happens to be speaking for everybody else.
Right.
Even though the ratio of positive and negative comments is whatever, you know, 98 to 2% or more, you know. So that was my experience. Thanks for bringing that up.
Well, and I know tons of artists. I see them, I know them, who have zero negative comments on their work.
Yeah.
And I've seen the negative comment and then it disappears an hour later, right? They're editing that comment feed and removing the negative comments and the ones that are criticizing the work and talking ill of the work. And that drives me crazy. I'm going to say it, like, why? Why are you so afraid of the negative comments and the critiques? If you're the one putting your work out into the world and you want to be an artist and you're making art, people are going to like it and people are going to dislike it. That's art. You're not an artist until somebody hates your work. I forget where I read that or who said it, but you're not an artist until somebody hates your work. So why are you putting your work out there for the world to see and then deleting negative comments or criticism? Like, to me, that's not living in freedom.
Yeah.
Like, that's still constraining, like, this point of view that is not realistic and is inauthentic. And that's being afraid of people. That's being afraid of something or someone by removing those things. I would say, let it lie. Let the crappy bullshit comments lie. Let the trolls and the idiots be there. Let the people who actually love your work defend you rather than you having to defend them. Yeah. And the way I handle that usually is I either handle it sarcastically, or if they have a public profile, which a lot of those don't, like you said, and I go, oh, this person's in New York. Okay, I'm going to send them a message and reply to the comment. Hey, I'll be in New York in 2 weeks. I'd love to take you out for a beer or grab a coffee. And usually that, you know, and I love what's your story?
The way that you engage with crappy. I love to watch it because I have a very different approach. I do the, and this is, you know, for anybody who follows me, if you ever see me give 2 thumbs up, that is me giving 2 other fingers up. It's just like, I mean, the real response is like, thanks for commenting. Thanks for putting my awful art in front of more people.
Yeah. So exactly. Thanks for spending the time.
This is a really good segue into rule number 2. Okay. So rule number 2,
get a really good bullshit detector and learn how to use it.
Yeah.
All right. I was looking at it. If you want to, you know, enjoy 30 minutes online, just look up quotes about bullshit and there's some fun ones that pop up. I picked two that really resonated
I love
with
this
me.
one.
But the first one, Sir Elton John said, "Welcome to the world of bullshit, my dear. You have arrived." Welcome to the world of bullshit, my dear. You have arrived. So it really goes to what you were saying about like the fact that anybody is commenting negatively means that whatever you're doing is actually getting in front of people who aren't already following you, right?
Yep.
So going back to like when I very first started, and it was just when I posted my very first piece, right? It was just friends and family. Not a lot of negative comments. Hey, cool to see you. Way to go, right? And so the BS is inevitable, and it grows the more you get what you think you want.
Yep.
Right. And you could speak to that, I'm sure. So part of it, I think, is just acknowledging like that it's all part of it. And if the goal is to have our work be seen by, more people, it is just embracing like not everyone's going to love it. And that's a darn good thing. We're not trying to make, whatever design, target, purchasable art that anybody could say, hey, that's filling a spot, on a wall. Right.
Yeah. And I also think people are going to take advantage of you as well, and people are going to try to get something from you or get things out of you or take advantage of your work and not really care about you as the artist and really try to pull something with your work. And I think, vanity galleries fall into this really well. Every artist, if you're out there on Instagram, you've gotten the huge cut and paste, which you don't realize is cut and paste in the beginning, DM from this gallery or this art fair that absolutely loves your work. And it's so cool. And we love everything that you're doing. And it would be such a great fit in our art fair in Milan or in Miami or Paris. And you're so excited because you haven't really done anything yet. And somebody's loving your work. And it's just so shitty that they're taking advantage of a young artist's emotional uplift of somebody loving my work and wanting to show it. And then you say,
they like me. They really like me.
But it's that, you know what I mean? It's that, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I'm getting a show in Milan and you sign the contract. Then you realize you're having to pay $1,500 to be in the show. And then you got to ship your work and ship it back. But you take the risk and the chance. And then the show's over and nothing's sold. And now you have to pay to ship it back, or they're going to charge you for storage, $50 a month or $100 a month until you ship it back. And so it's like you have to be able to call bullshit on things and be bold enough also to ask questions of other artists. Is this real? Is this legitimate? What is this person saying? And vet those relationships. Do they care about you? Or this is a tough one. This is a tough one for artists, figuring out what's bullshit and what isn't.
Back to the comment thing, there's something that you just reminded me of. And I think it's that like the process of asking questions. I mean, this awareness book that I mentioned before, like there's plenty of other writings, teachings, et cetera, that speak to this. It's not just this one, but it's just that whole idea of like really sitting with things and evaluating. All right, is there truth here? I mean, consider the source. That's always a great place to start, But regardless of where it's coming from, is there truth here? Is there anything here that has value for me to actually, consider? Yeah. And in most cases, the answer is probably no. But there are certainly some where it's like, oh, you know what? That's fair. That's interesting. I'll file that away under future consideration, potentially. Yeah. I think the more important question for me personally is identifying, why does this affect me? You know what I mean? It can be a really good sort of like heat check or thermometer around like, where am I at, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, to where this crappy comment from, random person out in the ether would affect me. Because that then tells me interesting, right? Kind of that third party observer. Oh, Nathan is affected by this. Now, why would that be? And more importantly, what do I need to do to get myself back in a place where I'm back on the beam, which then means I'm in a much better place to show up for the people in my life, make better art, and check all the things that I'm about, right? So I think that's really useful to consider. What is there truth here, and why does this affect me? And then from there, what can I or should I do about that, if anything?
Well, and I mean, you think about that Elton John quote. It's like you just entered the bullshit arena if you're going to be an artist at any level.
Yeah.
At any level,
Totally.
right? Music, photography, sculpture, dance, acting, anything. You're entering into a world that has a really, really big ceiling of bullshit that's kind of setting up above everything. And the higher you go and get, the more into that you get stuck, and you have to navigate through it. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. And so I think that's one reason why I love Jerry Gagosian so much. Her Instagram feed, because she's a literal bullshit detector. Like, that's really how she kind of got rolling in the art world, is by being a phenomenal bullshit detector and calling people out on it publicly. Yeah. She just had a great post this morning about not being invited to a certain thing because of health and safety reasons or whatever. And she's literally calling them out and then saying, oh, wow, well, I probably wasn't invited to these other things because of the same reason they give. But she's really good at weaving through that and navigating it and calling those things and pointing those fingers. And that popped into my head because I think, gosh, that's somebody that really
great example.
Is in the world trying to do those things in the art world at the higher level and pointing the finger at everybody. So,
tremendous follow. If you're not
absolutely
already
must
following her, you definitely should. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other part of it too. Is the second part of that rule number 2 is get a really good bullshit detector and learn how to use it.
Learn how to use it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those are two different things. If you think about a detector in the traditional sense of the word, is a tool, right? Something that identifies what something is, or is there a presence of some. It's a tool. Yeah. So purchasing a tool, I'm looking around. Yeah, there's probably some tools, certainly some back there that I have purchased, tools that I own that I don't yet know how to use or how to practically, apply. So how do you think about that? Like, thinking about the way that, over time that you've developed your bullshit detector, how does one learn how to use it once they have it?
I think cultivating relationships, number one, is a really good way to start, because if you're not cultivating a relationship, you don't really know where it lands yet. I mean, this is learning how to use it is an experience thing. It's time spent that really, really teaches you how to turn on that detector, because as artists, we're very emotional when it comes to people liking our work and wanting our work or being able to show our work and share our work. It's an emotional thing. It's a celebration when somebody wants our work on a wall. Like, it's massive. Yeah. People that aren't artists don't understand how absolutely immense that feeling is inside when you get a show or get into a group show or get a residency or something. It's really hard to cultivate those relationships in the beginning because you don't really have the time to navigate them. And gosh, I mean,
hold on. What do you mean by relationships exactly? What types are you referring to?
I'll share one of my own personal stories that really sucks. I had a good friend who I trust, who got me into a new blue chip gallery in LA. And this gallery was funded by a Michelin star restaurateur who had 2 restaurants, Michelin stars, and he hired the former Maddox Gallery LA director to be the director of the new of the new gallery. So I got into the gallery. They got 20 pieces. I went out to LA, took my work out there to meet the director, who's a fabulous person I adore. And the owner, I got to meet him and talk to him and spend some time with him. And he brought a big chef from a 3 Michelin star restaurant in, had all these things with the restaurant and the gallery next door. And he seemed incredible, just seemed amazing. I didn't get to spend a bunch of time, but I did my cultivation of when I was there, making sure I got time with him to feel him out and see, what he seems so incredible. Well, let's fast forward a year and a few shows in the gallery and things. He splits town with investor money, millions of dollars of investor money, leaves this chef, who is a famous chef, to dry, leaves the gallery manager to dry. The last artist who showed work had sold out the whole show. He didn't deliver any of the work to the buyers. The artist didn't get the money from the show. This guy splits town, closes the doors, locks everything up. Nobody can find him. FBI are involved. LAPD is involved. This guy took COVID, PPP loans, multiple millions of dollars of loans out, cheated the system to flee to Mexico or wherever he went. Long story short, my work was stuck in storage. Storage was going to auction it off, 21 pieces of mine. The gallery manager worked tirelessly to get my work out after she had already been fired for calling him out on financial things. So I got my work back. Some work was missing. Long story short, he was bullshit.
Yeah.
It was a con. We were conned. We were bullshitted by this guy into this wonderful thing, this situation that is so, oh my gosh, what an uplift for me career-wise, and these other artists who were involved. And then the guy stole art and stole money and fled the country. Right? This is what Elton John's talking about. Welcome to the world of bullshit, my dear. You've arrived. These things happen. It's unfortunate that they happen, but by learning from these things over the long road, you learn how to use your detector and feel people out and build that relationship, and then make the decision, you know what, I don't want to work with this person. I don't want to go this way.
It's interesting because when the reason I want to clarify first, but when you first said relationships, what came to mind for me is the value of cultivating relationships, connections, friendships of people who you can kind of run your thinking by.
Absolutely.
You know, hey, check my thinking on this, right? You know, whether it be an opportunity or direction you're taking with the work, you know, I mean, there's certainly a time to reach out and ask for that input, that feedback. Hey, how are you seeing this? Right. So it's funny when you said that, that's what came to mind for me is, the value of building connections, making friendships, people who you trust enough to tell you the truth, and people who you know have your best interests at heart, to where you can hear that truth and you know, receive it with the love and positivity with which it's, you know, intended. The other thing that came to mind for me is the value of, so when I think about a bullshit detector, I think about just trusting your gut. I mean, so much of this is intuitive, right?
That's great.
It's just intuition, you know, and we have that sort of, you know, we all have that innate ability to, you know, that sense, that feeling. And I think for me, one of the things in the art space specifically, one of the things that triggers it immediately for me now, having been on the receiving end of plenty of those, you know, whatever DMs, emails, you know, whatever solicitations, let's call them, is like the step one, does this sound too good to be true? I mean, there are good opportunities come along, you know what I mean? Like I've had some perfectly legitimate things, you know, come across. So you have to at least look at them, you know, and suss it out. But step one is like, does this sound, you know, too good to be true? Right. As the old saying goes, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So
don't
just
jump.
Don't jump. Right. Trusting your intuition, even if it means saying no to something or setting something aside that might have been legitimate, right? Like there was no way well, let me ask you. So the situation that you just described, like, did you have any of those like sort of tinges of like, I don't know, or was it complete blindside?
No, because my friend who introduced me, trust her ridiculously, and then got to know the gallery director, fell in love with her, adore her, right? And so it was really kind of these waves, right? They were conned as well. You know, it hurt their careers and it hurt their relationships because they went to bat for the money. The guy who, you know, founded the gallery, they went to bat with their artists to bring into that. Like they got bullshitted as well. So those things happen. But like you said, you know, there are times where you're really going to kind of take a step back and ask some questions and feel things out. And I've taken some of these vanity galleries all the way. I've said, hey, can I get on the phone? Can we chat through what you guys are doing? I'm really interested. I'd love to talk on the phone. And then getting somebody on the phone and then taking it a little bit further and realizing this is an intern. They don't even know what they're doing. Hey, who can I talk to that curates the show and does this? And then kind of realizing this is such bullshit. It's insane. But that experience has helped me tell other artists, hey, do not do this one. Don't do this one. Don't do that one. You know, and that network of having those people to run it through that filter is so viable and important as well, like you just said.
Well, and the reason I asked you that, I suspected that's what you're going to say, and I think it's worth mentioning that we're going to be wrong sometimes. You know,
absolutely.
I mean? Like, I don't know anybody who's never been snowed by something or somebody, or had moments where it's like, oh, yep. I mean, it's gonna happen, right? I mean, I think I have been aware of or involved in getting conned or observing people get completely conned by somebody who, it's just, when it all came out, it was a complete shock. Like,
Yeah.
what?
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
out of the blue, right?
Absolutely.
And of course, there's always the hindsight 2020. We can always play revisionist history and say, oh, well, actually, when you really play it back, and sure, like, yeah, that's fine. But like,
you can't know at the time. Yeah.
That's right. You made the best decision available with the information that you had available, and it worked out the way that it worked out. I want to throw another quote in here.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
I just want to add one more thing along that, and let's take it more to just like practical, your artwork. You and I have some real close friends. We're in a few different networks together, and we have some really close friends who are incredible artists. And one of them, I don't want to share any names right now just because of the studio mate, whatever, but one of their studio mates for a while came into the studio and was looking at new work that you and I and others in our network were celebrating and pushing. And her studio mate said, yeah, I think you should kind of stay away from that direction because it's just decorative art. It's just decorative.
Yeah.
But that caused her to go back in the studio and go, I thought I was onto something. It's just decoration. It's just decorative. So then she came to us, her network, and shared that story, and we all called bullshit. You know what I mean? We were just that foundation that she is for us as well, of saying, no. That's absolute bullshit. Do not listen to that. They don't know what they're saying. You keep going with what you're doing. And I think that really moves into the quote you're about to share.
Well, yes, but now you made me think of something else. That just speaks to the value of diversifying our influences. And
yeah,
I mean, hell, I'll just say, like, I forget what it was. We were having, my class of the class, my alumni class of your mentorship program. I mean, we stayed in touch. We had like regular meetings for almost 2 years after the program. And I don't remember who it was or what it was about, but somebody, maybe me, I don't even know, said something to the effect of, Ty said, this about that. And as much as we all respect and value, your input and your wisdom, somebody said, again, maybe me, maybe somebody else, well, Ty's not always right. And Ty would, if he was on this call right now, would say, I'm not always right. You know what I mean? So the point is, like, in those relationships, in those influences, at the end of the day, it ultimately is up to us to identify, like, there is no one, human source of truth to say this is that, right? And so the value of, again, diversifying our influences and our connections to say, hey, what do you think about this, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, deciding how much are we going to let any of it influence the choices that we make going forward, if any, right? Because
absolutely.
there's a time to sit with it and say, all right, duly noted, off I go. Which again, just comes back to the whole idea and the principles that we're talking about with this whole episode, which is like, when you've got your own true north, when you've got your own compass, then we can always, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm trying to do here. I get to decide, right? What I do with that, we get to decide as artists, what we do, if anything, with the inputs that we're allowing to impact us. All right. Yeah. So that next quote, Janis Joplin, a lot of musical references today. It's fun.
Yep.
Janis Joplin said, to be true to myself, to be the person that was on the inside of me and not play games. That's what I'm trying to do mostly in the whole world, is not bullshit myself and not bullshit anybody else. Okay. So what I hear from that is, once we have this bullshit detector, as we continue to learn how to use it, we got to apply it to ourselves. We have to ask that question. Am I full of shit here? Am I trying to, just as an example, am I trying to, do something that I think is going to be received a certain way? Am I trying to please an audience? Am I trying to please an influence that at the end of the day doesn't really matter? Am I full of shit here? Am I being authentic to myself, to my vision of what I'm trying to accomplish, and what the execution of that vision looks like in this particular instance? We have to check that, I think, on a regular basis.
I want to clarify something before I say what I'm about to say, because as artists, you and I are two artists who are not trying to, our end goal isn't to be rich off of our art. Our end goal isn't, I just want to sell a bunch of paintings and make a lot of money. Our end goal is to make great art, hoping it sells, hoping we make money and can, put money away for retirement savings, all that stuff, and live off it. Like, yes, we want to do that. We need to make art, but our end goal is to make the best art we can make and continue to develop and grow and make really, really strong art in our lifetime. And I think we say that on every episode. So with that being said, when we say people that want to do that, that's your choice. That's fine. We're not saying that you're doing it wrong, who's doing it right. This is where you and I come from as artists and why we make art. So when I think of that Janis Joplin quote, this is where I go, why are you making art, number one? Because I don't think personally that if somebody's just making something and taking a class and doing exactly what they learned that the other artist is making and then replicating it over and over and over and over again and making something, to me, that's decoration. To me, that's just a craft. That's not really the heart of the artist and creating something their whole life and developing and evolving. And so that's what I think Janis Joplin is saying there. I don't want to do something that somebody else is doing regularly. I want to create me. I want to write my music and sing my songs the way I want to sing them, the way that I truly feel inside, and I want them to develop and grow over time. Unfortunately, she didn't have a lot of time. But does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. And that's why I chose this bullshit, this quote about bullshit.
Yeah.
I think the quote itself is bullshit, but the reason why it was so great coming from her is because I'm no Janis Joplin historian. I don't know this to be true, but I would be shocked if at some point in her career, she wasn't told to, hey, can you sing a little bit more like everybody else? Can you make music that sounds a little bit like
she absolutely was told that. Yep.
Right. Yeah. And so that authenticity of being true to our own voice as we continue to develop it is absolutely critical for sure.
Well, and you think about this, our quoter, Laurie Anderson, did what she wanted to do her entire career. Like she created her own instruments. She created her own vocal synthesizers. She invented so many things to do the things she wanted to do so they would be her. They would be Laurie Anderson. Yeah. Lou Reed, same way. Both of them lived under that mantra. I mean, Lou even had albums that were pulled off the shelves after the release because people would go buy the album, go home and listen to it and return it because they didn't like it. They're like, what the heck is this? I think it was his Metal Machine album in 1975 that was instrumental, which is now lauded by critics as this incredible work of art. 90% of the people that bought it returned it, I think, on the day it came out. And then the record label pulled it from the shelves. But he did what he wanted to do. He was creating himself. And by doing that album, it grew into other things later that were really successful too. So our quoters live that mantra that Janis just said too and created beautiful work.
I mean, it's kind of wild we made it this far in the episode without really talking about Lou. I mean, we got you. I mean, you're guy wearing the T-shirt to the concert. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
Yeah. For those of you just listening, Ty is rocking a Velvet Underground T-shirt that appears to be, all right, I just got to ask you this. Is that, is the wear on that real? Like, is that real wear from you owning it over time, or did you buy it with those little, like frame marks on it?
Oh, no, I think I've had this shirt since probably, 2000, maybe.
It's a great answer. Even if it's not true, that's the
there
answer
you go.
I was hoping you,
yep.
I was hoping you would say.
Nope, it is
because you can
100%.
buy those concert tees that are quote unquote vintage because they've been thrown in the dryer with a bunch of rough objects. I think this is a good time to throw in another quote by Laurie in a different interview. And let's just play it here, Ty.
I mean, I'm an artist because I want to be free. That's my whole goal, and I hate it when people tell me what to do.
Oh my gosh, Nathan! I just hearing those words from her, like I'm not lying when I say this. Like I wanted to jump up and just throw my arms in the air because I just felt like this burden, like just this heaviness, just left me because I understand that and those words so greatly. And I know you do too, because we both came from the business world, marketing world. We worked our butts off doing so many different things to try to get to a point where we could be free with work,
Preach.
with life.
Preach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
so
the number of times that, I mean, that kind of goes back to that one of that Jim Rohn quote that I shared, but it's just kind of that whole idea of like, I mean, when you're playing in somebody else's, sandbox, you kind of have to play by some rules. I mean, you take a kid to a playground, like, hey, you may want to throw these rocks at the slide. Let's be honest. That's pretty fun, but we can't do that here because there are other kids that want to use the slide. Right. Like when you are playing in somebody else's world, there are rules, that you can't simply ignore because you feel like it. So the fact that, if you're an artist in any capacity, whether that's, 50 hours a week or 50 minutes, on a Sunday morning, when we are in that space of creating, we get to live in our own little world, our own little universe where whatever rules exist are there because we decided upon them.
Yep.
And that is an absolutely, absolutely beautiful thing. Such a freeing feeling, right? And anybody listening to this who's done any type of creating knows exactly what we mean when we say that. I mean, I think as I've hopefully matured a little bit, as an adult, I've become more aware of the resistance, like the immediate resistance I have to the feeling I get when I am told, what to do. That freedom, with that freedom comes responsibility, with that freedom comes the charge, the expectation, the necessity, I would say, for us to be clear about what it is that we're trying to do, and have some guidelines around how we are trying to do it. Understanding that we can change those rules anytime, we make sense, but having something in place, back to that, the way that she introduced that core quote here.
It's good to have a few like catchwords to fall back on, and you don't have enough time to think.
It's good to have something to fall back on, right? So that freedom is not just complete, anarchy and chaos.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it can be at times, but that's a pretty rough way without any objective or vision for what you're trying to accomplish. That's when that freedom is taken, I don't want to say too far, but when that freedom doesn't have any structure around it, again, self-imposed structure, then that can be, I would say, I don't want to say dangerous, but that can be a tricky place to live.
Well, and I just want to encourage artists out there, like, don't let your pursuit of what you want to do and you're not able to do yet with your work, put a wall into that freedom. Like, constrict it. Because if you're getting to create art, like you said, full-time, part-time, quarter of the time, barely any time, in those moments, you should go into that studio with that sense of freedom and not let anything constrict you. And so but that's not easy. I'm not saying that's an easy thing. That is a very learned thing. It comes with time. And that's why I have Andy Warhol's quote that this podcast is based on my studio wall. That is my mantra. That is my little rule, that in those moments when I'm just fighting myself so ridiculously and the freedom is becoming constricted and I'm trying to control things a little too much, I look at my wall and I see that quote, just make art. Just make art. Don't worry about it. Just make it and allow that burden to leave me and allow the freedom to fill the room. Because that's really hard for us sometimes as artists. We end up filling the room with more things than freedom. And so then we really get frustrated and we really get upset, and it ruins those moments. It ruins those moments where we are truly free. We're less constricted by the time of the real world when we're in the studio. We don't have those constrictions of the real world when we're making art. So we should be operating in freedom. So that's just encouragement for artists out there. Find something, find some quote, some mantra, some little rules or whatever you need to write down that kind of becomes your thing for in those moments when you feel constricted. You could look at it, breathe easy, take a second, think about it, let the freedom exist.
Yeah. And deciding on what those things are in a place of I want to say non-emotional is not the right word, but certainly a non-reactive place. And developing those things over time is really, really important. Whether it's picking a quote that you're talking about, or whether it's sort of, crafting your own mantra over time. We'll talk about that as we kind of close, but I think it's really valuable to, I'm imagining somebody listening to this and being like, I don't have any rules for myself. It's just whatever. And it's like, well, whether you're aware of it or not, we're all making choices every single time we sit down or stand up to make something. You know what I mean? Like paint color selection, right? You're not using every color on every piece. You're not using every brush on every piece. You're making choices, along the way. And sometimes rules, again, when intentionally identified and chosen, can in themselves be very freeing, in that we are, in choosing, I'm going to doodle with this pen today, I have now eliminated the need to make 1,000 other choices, which allows me to focus on whatever I might be trying to, make, right?
I hate the word rules. I'm trying to think of another word for rules for me, because I just can't stand that word myself. That's just me being a smart ass. But you need to have some guidelines, some goals, something to achieve and attain, but something that keeps you focused. So I think that's where you need to have something in place that keeps you focused on where you want to go. Because if you're just operating out of control all the time, you're just going to be operating out of control. Sure, it's fine. Absolute freedom also exists within where you want to go and where you're trying to take yourself to. So if you just operate in freedom with nothing else in there, hey, not much is going to happen. And so, what are those things? Where do you want to go? You better put something into place so you have something to achieve and get to. Does that help at all?
I wasn't asking in this moment for help. But, I like what you said. Does that... Go ahead.
I think you should, in that comment, Nathan, you should follow Laurie and Lou's rule 3 a little bit better with me.
All right.
Because Nathan, rule 3, Laurie and Lou said,
be really, really tender.
I had to really think about that one years ago when I first heard this. What does she mean by be tender? Okay, I get that. Be nice, be whatever. But what does that really have to do with me as an artist? What does it have to do with art making? What does it have to do, as a general rule of thumb? You and I looked up the definition of tender and just talked through. It's showing gentleness and concern or sympathy. And I think one thing that really sucks about artists a lot of the time is they don't have a lot of sympathy for younger artists or those that are further back than they may be, and don't really show much gentleness or concern. I mean, there were moments when I was a beginning artist and I was reaching out to artist friends that I had met at shows and in the art scene in Dallas and asked for help. Literally, because we don't know what we're doing. We don't have a clue. And I just asked for, hey, how did you get into the gallery world? How did these things happen for you? How have your relationships with so-and-so? And I'm not lying. I got answers that, sorry, I can't help you. Yeah, it's different for everybody. I can't really give you any help or any hints. And I thought, and that was early on for me as a young artist. And I went, okay, rule number 1, never be that. Because that hurts. Like that sucked. Somebody I looked up to who I had not a deep friendship with, but a acquaintance relationship that we'd see each other at openings and talk and hang out, and we had other friends, to get the sorry, can't help you.
Yeah.
It was really hurtful. Like, it was not tender. It was untender. And I think for me, that's when I put in play, never be that person if you get somewhere. And I wasn't that person, but I thought, let's remember this moment right here. And that really did help me when I started my mentorship program. That's one of the reasons I started it. I have found some success in the art world. I have gotten some things. Now, how can I give back? How can I be vulnerable enough with the mistakes I've made, the hard lessons I've learned, but also the luck and the blessings and the success that I've had on that road to invest in younger artists, those who aren't there yet, those who are going to have a really hard time? How can I give back and invest in them? And so that's what that quote to me really, really says.
Do you want to share? You had another quote that you wanted to drop in the mix on this topic.
Yes, and this was a really important one for me when I read the book by Madeline L'Engle, Walking on Water, Reflections in Faith and Art, that I read once a year. And she shared...
Hold on, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just this is bad form on my part, but I'll forget otherwise.
Yeah.
If you're listening right now and you're like, I don't know anybody, there's no one I can reach out to. I'm a broken record. I've said this a dozen times before on this podcast. I'll say it 100 more. There are so many mentors and incredible wisdom in books. So you'll notice that we share, like, look at the bookshelf behind Ty. We're both of us are avid readers and consuming. And let's be honest, like, reading things and the types of insights and wisdom from the type of people that, for the most part, we don't get to just call up. You know what I mean? Like, these are the greatest thinkers and achievers of all time. So in the absence of anyone else that you can physically talk to, in person or over the phone, like, make the greats of present day and of history your mentors, and just gobble up, because there's so much wisdom and advice and positive influence that can be gained from doing that. All right.
Well, and
PSA complete.
No, I'm going to piggyback. Part 2 of your PSA here is I'm a huge used book fan. So I go to used bookstores to find and search for art books and books that I want to read or find. And I find books I wasn't even looking for, and they're a lot cheaper than buying them brand new. And sometimes they have really cool notes by previous owners, which I love. That's why I go to used bookstores to find art books, because maybe there's some incredible notes in there that somebody else has left me. I consider it a treasure. If you can't afford to buy books, shockingly, libraries are still open today. There are libraries where you can go just sit for an hour or two in the afternoon and grab a stack of art books and read them. If you're on Spotify, they now have audiobooks, so you can listen to the books if you need to. So you don't have an excuse, is what I'm saying. You can go on YouTube and watch lectures by these artists and these people. Listen, some of my greatest mentors are no longer alive. They're in my books. They're in books.
Yep.
And I've learned so much of what I've learned from them. So, but this is great as well, because this goes into the quote I'm going to share from the Madeline L'Engle book. And she's talking about the work coming to the artist and asking for the artist to serve the work. But she also has this great quote by Jean Rhys that says, "Listen to me. All of writing," and I'm going to add all of art, "is a huge lake. There are great rivers that feed this lake, like Picasso and Helen Frankenthaler and Kandinsky. And there are mere trickles, like myself, Jean Rhys. All that matters is feeding the lake. I don't matter. The lake matters. You must keep feeding the lake." And I love that, because for me, what that said is, I may never be Picasso. I'm probably not going to be Picasso. I'm not going to be Joan Mitchell. But I can be Ty Nathan Clark in Waco, Texas, and still feed the same lake that Picasso and Joan Mitchell and Frankenthaler and Cy Twombly and my favorite artists have fed in bigger ways. I can still be a part of that lake and influence, be vulnerable, be tender, and help younger artists and artists who are trying to make it. I'll speak with high schoolers. I'll speak with kids. I've done painting classes at our local museum with families, with young kids and their families, and help feed that lake. I can be a part of that same great lake in my own place where I am, even if I never achieve the greatness of some of those other artists. It matters. It definitely matters, which means you as an artist definitely matter where you are.
Well, and I love that metaphor of the lake, because that's the difference between a lake and, a pond is that it is fed with fresh water. There's a renewable source that continues to add to what's already there, replace what's already there. But I don't know I can't source this quote, but the whole, a person never steps in the same stream twice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Because it's moving, it's changing, it's ever evolving. So making our contribution, right, adding whatever we have to that lake, but also drinking from it as well, which then becomes this beautiful cycle of gaining, and being renewed, being refreshed, and then adding what we've done with that back into the source for everybody else to pull from. It's beautiful.
And I think there's a lot of vulnerability in that. And you have a great quote that kind of ties into strength and weakness and vulnerability.
Yeah. I'll just read it now. This is a quote by Rumi, who said, "Our greatest strength lies in the gentleness and tenderness of our heart." I mean, we have talked about this. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing here, I think, is being vulnerable, being open. What was this? Here's a good little callback. What was the one? We got a comment on one of the reels we posted from the podcast. What was it? Something about, remember what it was?
Are you talking about the
yes.
negative comment that said,
yeah.
I'm sick and tired of seeing two men cry and be over emotional, just get to the point, or something. Yeah.
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 And we're like, cool. Back to my previous little filter of like, consider the source, is this significant? Does it matter?
Yeah.
We had a good laugh and we moved on, because we both are of the belief that true strength is rooted in weakness, is rooted in vulnerability, and there's my studio assistant.
Nice.
That's my, Leo, hold on. Leo wants to go say hello. And before people go all, thinking, oh, this guy's fancy with his studio. It's my daughter who helps me out during the summertime for 6 to 10 hours a week, but she's become a really good editor. She actually is better in Lightroom, Photoshop. She's working on my catalog as I speak. So good stuff. Where were we? Vulnerability. So
vulnerability,
but I love that, right? Our greatest strength lies in the gentleness and tenderness, of our hearts. So for us, I mean, whoever made that comment, good for you. Hopefully you got something that works for your operating system, for life. You've got your rules. Hopefully they're working for you, but I think for us, and I would argue for, most artists, like the tenderness, that idea. It's a beautiful word. In fact, you put the definition up. We didn't read it. Tender. I read it. The definition of tender. Oh, you did? Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for paying attention, Nathan. Way to
read it again, though.
I'll read it again, though, because apparently I wasn't here when you did. Showing gentleness and concern or sympathy. When I first before reading that definition, when I think about tender, something else that comes to mind for me is a certain type of openness and receptiveness. This isn't the most visually pleasing analogy or metaphor, but like wounds are tender. Yeah. Right. I don't know why that's something that just comes to mind for me, but like a fresh cut or scrape, like it's open. It is receptive in not good ways, right? Because that then can lead to infection. So back to that whole bullshit detector of identifying like what we want to let in or not. But there is a lot of benefit, I think, in cultivating openness and receptiveness, because I think that for me, when I am tender, when I am open, when I'm receptive, then I'm able to, when I'm with myself in the studio, I'm able to hear what the work has to say. I'm able to receive ideas, intuition, inspiration, call it what you want. When I'm not tender, right? What would be the opposite of that? Whatever, rigid, hard, guarded, right? Like, boy, whether we're talking about how we interact with ourselves or how we interact with others, that's not a great way. If you and I are having a conversation and I am trying to be of value to you, let's say you reached out to me and we're, looking for my input on whatever. If I'm not tender, if I'm not open, if I'm not receptive to what you're saying, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, anything that I might offer up is going to be empty, hollow, sort of status quo BS, as opposed to when I'm really in it, when I'm really in the moment, again, with myself, with the work, with other people, then I'm able to then reciprocate that energy, that feeling, and hopefully do something, provide something of value to, put some fresh water back into that stream that refreshes the lake.
Absolutely. And I think One of my favorite musicians, poets, and artists, Nick Cave, really goes even deep. Just what you said about that vulnerability with yourself in the studio. He says there's something about being open and vulnerable that is conversely very powerful, maybe even transformative. For me, vulnerability is essential to spiritual and creative growth, whereas being invulnerable means being shut down, rigid, and small. My experience of creating and writing is finding enormous strength through vulnerability. You're being open to whatever happens, including failure and shame. There's a certain vulnerability to that and incredible freedom. He said it's very transformative. Why? Because you're being so open to whatever happens in that moment, and sometimes failure and shame, which also proves that is vulnerable and that is expressing a big freedom. I love that quote. When I read it in his book, Faith, Hope, and Carnage, it just really, I had to read it over and over and over again and thought, I'm glad that's where I sit. I'm glad he's saying something that I truly embrace in my work and in my practice. And also, being vulnerable to the work, being vulnerable to creative growth means allowing room for failure, allowing room to mess up, allowing room to not be absolutely perfect and planned. It's opening up that freedom, being vulnerable with your work in the studio. You know what? I'm okay if I ruin this right now because I've got to try these new things.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Let's go. And oh shit, I totally freaking ruined it. But what it taught me about the next piece and the next 5 pieces was so immensely powerful. I needed to feel that failure. I needed to work through that to get to the next point.
It's funny just thinking about Nick Cave as an artist. A lot of similarities with Laurie Anderson, with Lou Reed, with some of the great, artists who have definitely made work that has been way out there, that has certainly not been, celebrated, in the moment, but over
it's not pop.
Right. Did you ever watch Peaky Blinders?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my wife and I, we disagree on whether or not to watch. I like watching the opening credits, even if we're binging a show, because I feel like it just kind of like sets the tone. But yeah, she's not a fan of Red Right Hand, the openings.
Yeah,
that's my first thought when I think of Nick Cage, just because we finished that recently. We were a little late to the party, but yeah, I mean, somebody like Nick Cave. I mean, that's again, consider the source. That's why a quote like that. I mean, vulnerability is essential. All right, essential, not optional, not like nice to. It's essential to spiritual and creative growth. Whereas being invulnerable means being shut down, rigid, small. And that's beautiful. Yeah.
When I think about
I love it because you're being open to whatever happens, including failure and shame, right? Like there's that acknowledgement of this might not work, but the fact that I am vulnerable, the fact that we are seeking that vulnerability, that we are open to the ideas, the inspiration, what comes, where the work decides that it wants to go, it's essential, right? Yeah. It's essential to spiritual and creative growth, which if that's what we're after is the ultimate goal. And let's just, again, back to the, career, let's call it trajectory of the artists that we're talking about here, Laurie, Lou, Nick Cave, like that's kind of what we're after, right? Is a long term, a beautiful trajectory, a beautiful body of work that is diverse, that is different, that shows a transformation, over time. Whereas any of the above could have, when they did have something that gained more popular accolades, could have at any time. And many artists of all types have certainly fallen in the trap of like, oh, this is the thing that I need to keep doing in order to, and it may work. Like following that model may work for an album or two, for whatever, a body of work or two. But at a certain point, that's going to lead to probably a shorter career arc, certainly a less satisfying and fulfilling one.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I love so much about Nick Cave is he was constantly up against that, right? He would constantly feel led and vulnerable to create something so new and so different than the last album that all of his fans love so much, that he would work through that, almost fighting that shame and working through it in the beginning when all the old fans hated it and would blast him for it and, get so mad. But so you could, as an artist, feel shame that you didn't, oh, why did I do that? Oh, I just upset everybody. But instead he's like, tough luck. Like, this is where the work's taking me. So this is what I'm creating. I'm vulnerably being open to the freedom of doing something so new and different that I know you may not like it anymore, but I know there's going to be a new audience on the other side waiting. That's right. That freedom. That's a scary freedom, but that's a very learned freedom as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of the quote that that Eric Bryce shared during our episode, a Rick Rubin quote that I'll just paraphrase here because I don't have it in front of me, but something to the effect of, the audience doesn't know what they want, they only know what they've had before. They only know what's come before, something like that.
Yes.
But isn't that so true, right? Like I the audience only knew what came. I like what came before, so just keep feeding us. More of that. It's like, no, the audience doesn't know what they want, or to your point, the audience that one doesn't even have yet, because the thing that's coming next hasn't come yet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a really interesting way of thinking about it, for sure.
Very
well. We set out, this is probably going to be a quick episode. Here we are, $1:20 in, and I feel like it's probably a good time to. This feels like a good time to kind of wrap up, unless you had something else on that third rule.
No, I think we should. Close. I think we should give. Let's give our listeners kind of some, not homework, but a takeaway that they can kind of think about and process.
Tangible takeaway, yeah. So here's our homework. Should you be so inclined, something to try if it sits with you. But we opened with it. We're going to close with it, but just the idea of, I think spending time developing your rules, your code, your principles, what matters to you, really, I think, dialing in that compass that is going to tell you where true north is, with the understanding that it's going to change over time. It's not quite as static as like, no, that's north. No, it's not like that. It's going to change. It's going to evolve, and we get to change the map anytime that we choose to. So I think that's one of the things, just to spend a moment thinking about what prevents a person, just to keep in the first person, what has prevented me at times from investing time and effort into, sort of laying some of these things out is, what if it changes? What if it, and it's like, it's going to change. Yeah. It should change.
Yep.
Back to our point about, Nick Cave and the other artists that we've talked about. So acknowledging that where you start is not going to end up, but having something, right? Back to Laurie's idea of, it's good to have a few catchwords to fall back on, having something in place, having a map that you're working from, at any given time, to at least have a starting point of, how do I get from here to there? Because here's the thing, like, and you've navigated through this with a lot of the artists that you have mentored, but the moment always feels bigger than it really is. And it's so easy to get stuck. It's so easy to get caught. I had this yesterday. I was looking at a piece that I think is finished, ? And going from, this is the best thing I've ever made, to this is garbage, and I'm gonna roast some marshmallows over it when I burn it, and everywhere in between. You know what I mean? Like, there's gonna be moments, a lot of them, I think, especially if you're in the game of exploring new territory, where you're going to get completely stuck in the wall that's right in front of us. And it's easy. It's really, really easy to lose sight of that of what it is that I'm trying to do, of what it is that this is really about. And I think that having something in front of us, a code, again, principles in place, a statement of sorts that we can look back at and acknowledge, oh yeah, that's what's true. That's what I've decided is true for me broadly. And then with that knowledge, for me, almost always comes a sense of peace and perspective around like, oh, this is just a thing. This is just a day, a piece. This is just a teeny little tick, a little data point amongst, thousands, millions of others, over time. This isn't that big of a deal.
Yeah.
Take a breath, move on. But having something in place really helps us, it reminds us of the truth. So get something, and I'll ask you to give some more tactical ideas on how to go about doing that. Revise it, post it, put it in front of you, have it on your phone, have it hanging up, in your studio, the Post-it note on your dashboard, whatever it might be. Spend time with it and let that truth really soak in so that you have access to it when you need it. But let me kick it back to you. How do you go about helping people? Where do I start? Where does one start going about doing this?
Yeah, one of the things,
context of art.
Yeah, one of the things we work on in my mentorship program with artists is I have the artists in the program journal, and this didn't exist when you were in the program. This came later. Journal about who you are as your most authentic self when you are in the studio and you're working. How and when do you feel most alive and free when you're creating and making art? Journal about that. What are those things? What are those moments? Where are you wanting to go with your art? And what are you wanting to do? Write that little personal artist statement, or write your own quote that you say that has Nathan Terborg as the quoter, and put it up in your studio. So in those moments when you're fighting and the struggle is real and you want to throw in the towel, you turn around and you look at that little statement, you look at that quote you wrote, and you remember. Because we need to remember why we're doing this, because it's not easy. It's really, really hard. And that quote, be tender, be really tender, you also know that's for you first. You need to be really tender to yourself first. If you can't be tender with yourself, it's going to be real hard being tender with others. It's going to be really, really hard. So we have to have that reminder of, when do I feel most alive and most authentic? When do I feel most me and the most freedom when I'm creating? Write about that, and write about why you're in it and where you're wanting to go. So you have that reminder regularly to tell you and remind you that that's a confidence lifter for you. It should be. So I would encourage everybody to do that. I don't know if all my artists do it in the program. I hope they do, because it's not for me, it's for them. But I highly encourage you to do that. I have my things. I have my quotes on my wall in my studio that are for me. And so I just encourage everybody to do that, because I think it will help. I really do.
Quotes are such a great place to start, and then sort of, develop your own spin on how that applies to you personally.
Sure.
I'm going to share a couple, and I'll ask you to do the same. I've got a list of different sort of, mantras, quotes, ideas that I refer back to remind myself of the truth, as I mentioned before. One of those is "Kill your darlings." And that's a quote I may have talked about on the podcast before, but it's a Stephen King quote from his book. To my recollection, I think it's his only, nonfiction book, and the only one I've read of this, to be honest, but called On Writing. It's a really, really, really good book. Yeah. But he talks about, kill your darlings, meaning, nothing is precious. So in the context of writing, he talks about the importance of, there may be a scene, a character, a narrative that you're really in love with, but it just doesn't fit the whole. It just doesn't work and serve the overall, piece. And so the importance of really identifying, like, nothing is precious. Nothing is too protected to escape the scalpel of the editor, should it need to. So that's, anyway, I'm just giving an example, but that's one thing that I find to be very helpful. So when, not if, but when I get stuck deciding, like, I love this little moment here, but I just can't get through the mental and physical gymnastics of trying to make it work within the overall composition. Let's say, all right, bye. Nice to know you.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go ahead and dismiss you from this one. And hopefully a version of you will come back another time, when it makes more sense. But the reason why that's so valuable for me personally is because it's really easy to, again, prisoner of the moment, get stuck with, like, oh, but it's so cool. It's so, surely I have to find a way to keep it. So that's just one example of a quote that has become a sort of a mantra for me. What for you are some of the things that you go back to when you get stuck in the studio or in general? Just to give people an example of like what this might be. Guys, this can take on, gals, people, humans listening, this can take on so many different forms and iterations. There's no right way to do it. The point is just do it.
Yeah. For me, I mean, I have certain books I go to. I have certain books I go back to and I reread, or I mean, all my books have teeny little Post-it notes lined, and I just go through and pick out some things and kind of read reminders from artists of the past who are in the same place that I may be in. I think that's a really big one for me. And then I just spend time in silence, to be honest. I sit and I just breathe, like you said.
I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
I'm pressing you for I want an example of a TNC, Ty Nathan Clark, mantra, principle, something that you go back to that you've identified helps recenter you in the moment when you get stuck.
I'll be honest. My main one is just the Warhol quote, just make art. I mean, that's become so thick in my skull that I just go, just freaking make it, dude. Quit complaining, quit bitching and moaning inside, right? Because that's what it is. I'm in the studio by myself, so I'm only doing that to myself. And I just go, just make it, And I also go back to Stephen Pressfield and recognizing resistance. And I literally stop and I literally recognize the resistance. I hear him saying, what is it? What's holding you back right now? What's coming in? Let's not let it in. He's got plenty of quotes in his book where he talks about not letting resistance enter the studio door. If I have a lot of resistance, I don't even go in the studio door. I sit in my office for a while, recognize it, and then go in. And I just think I've gotten to the point where there's a few things that are so ingrained in my head. I don't have to stop and think too much anymore about it, because I'm just get in the zone the second I walk in and start making art. And when I get tired, physically and mentally tired, I stop. I recognize that that's the time when I'm going to really start kind of getting in my way. When I'm too mentally tired or physically tired, I just kind of call it quits that day. And one of the reasons I'm not sharing any quotes is because they're future episodes.
Well, that's great, because I mean, what I want to stop you, like you actually just shared a guiding principle that I think is really valuable. When I feel blank, then I blank. I mean, that's a principle. That's a rule.
Yeah, for sure.
It comes back to, again, my 8th time saying the word awareness in this episode, but becoming aware of like, oh, I am tired. I am whatever, stuck. I am in a place where continuing to push isn't useful or intelligent. Okay. When I feel blank, when I am blank, then I blank.
Yep.
It's a great place to start. It's very simple, but incredibly powerful. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Yeah, none. I would say for everybody that's been listening, if you don't know Laurie Anderson, get on Spotify or Apple Music and listen to Oh Superman, her most famous song. It's one of my favorites. It's been a lot of different films and documentaries out there. Watch some of her interviews, watch some of her performance art, or her playing music at Carnegie Hall, or any of these things, playing violin. I mean, she's just a stud. And go listen to some Lou Reed. My theme song, if I had a theme song or if I had background music, everywhere I went, it would be Street Hassle by Lou Reed. That's always kind of been my thing. I have a playlist on Spotify that is called Walking. And anytime I deboard a plane, I hit play. There's 11 songs. Street Hassle by Lou Reed's the first one. And that's how I leave a plane anywhere I go. I have this playlist that goes through my favorite background songs for me. And anytime I'm in New York and I'm walking through New York or LA, I hit my walking playlist and listen. So listen to Laurie Anderson's Oh Superman and Lou Reed's Street Hassle this week. And I hope it's an incredible week in the studio for you all.
I love that. Oh, doggone it. We were going to be professional podcasters and tell people that they can watch us on YouTube if they're not already. And if they're watching on YouTube and they want to listen, they can do that on Spotify or Apple or any place where you get your podcasts.
Yeah, they can do that anywhere.
Are you talking to me now? Did we in the
Yeah, I'm just talking to you now. We're done. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll probably keep that in anyways. Cool. No, I'm just joking.